Pakistan gets a lot of things right? Especially in terms of demographic. So we've been a services ecosystem, a services country for the longest time. And building product is only something that's, I think, come into play over the last 10 years or so.
Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to the Asia Tech Podcast. Meenah Tariq. I got that right, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
Yay, I remembered. A co-founder and the CEO of Metric is with us today. Meenah, thank you so much for coming to the show. Before we get into the main part of this conversation, can you give our listeners a little bit of your background, please?
Sure. It's always really hard for me to give only a little bit of my background. So
Then give me a
stop me
lot.
where you think I've
No, give me a lot then.
when you think I've given enough background, just stop me, okay? Because I can start from when I was born or like even before that. No, kidding. So my name is Meenah Tariq. I've been working in emerging market ecosystems for the last decade of my life. But I've been very lucky in that I've had seats at all different sides of the table. I worked with an accelerator program for about 4 years, worked with a few hundred startups through that in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. Then I started working with the World Bank for about 4 years. I helped them design a program called the Women Entrepreneurs Financing Initiative for Pakistan and then also for Iraq. And I also worked with the USAID, training about 700 women SMEs in person in tier 2, tier 3 cities. So all of my life, my career has been working in and with around entrepreneurs and small businesses before I came to Metric and starting that off.
I want to get to Metric in a little bit, but I want to stay on this topic if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And can you tell me exactly where are you from originally? If that's an easy question. For me, it's a hard question, but for you, maybe it's not so hard.
Yeah, no, not that hard. I'm from Pakistan. I lived there pretty much all of my life, except for the brief period of time when I went to the US. I went on a Fulbright scholarship to do my MBA from Babson College. So I was living in Boston for a few years while we had the polar vortex and like all the fun sort of snowy stuff happening. So for a girl that was coming from Pakistan who had never lived in snow before, it was a very interesting experience overall. But yeah, I've lived in Pakistan all my life. I'm now based out of the UAE.
Okay. I love this story already. Can we talk about Boston a little bit if you don't mind? My family's originally from Boston, and I remember when I was growing up, like shoveling the driveway, which was like one of my least favorite things to do. And I always wonder what it's like for someone who didn't grow up in that type of weather to then like experience, like you said, these amazing snowstorms. We had one storm when I was a kid where this was when I was in Connecticut, but where they shut down the state for 7 days. And it was so cold that the snow froze and you could literally ice skate on your front lawn. But what was it like for you, like when the snow started coming?
I think that's the exact. So the 2 years that I was there, we got the most for that time. We got the biggest snowstorms and the most intense weather and all of that fun stuff, right? And I wasn't living inside main Boston, so I was living in Wellesley, which is a really white, really rich town right outside of Boston, if you know it. So
Good
there's like
description.
beautiful mansions all around, and then Babson College in the middle in Babson Park. It is gorgeous. So in the start, it was like I landed university starts in August, right? So I landed in August, and right after we started getting cold weather. I could not have imagined weather so cold that your lungs would feel like they were freezing. Like I could not imagine that if every time you took a breath, like it would feel like you were taking like ice inside, right? But there's a funny story. So during winter break, I had nowhere to go because again, I didn't know. I was living in the dorms and I didn't know that the dorms shut down during winter. So if you're an international student who doesn't have the money to pay for a ticket back home, you're left with nowhere to go. So I was really lucky. I found amazing people who hosted me and let me live in their houses. So I had to take a flight because the dorm was closing down. So I had to take a flight. And now again, because I was in Wellesley, getting to Boston Logan is like a really long drive and it's expensive, right? And if you're a student that's on a stipend and on scholarship, you don't want to cough up that kind of money. So I had my dorm RA message and saying, Meenah, I'm going to get a ride with one of the other students and I'm also taking a flight at this time. So if your flight is close to mine, maybe you can also ride with us, and this other student will drive us. And it was a snowstorm. So I said, that makes so much more sense. I feel safer going with people I know. So I'll go with you. Now, I didn't know who the driver of the car was. It was a snowstorm, and the driver of the car was an Indian student who was also living in snow for the very first time in his life. So he was driving in a snowstorm for the very first time in his life.
Oh
I was
no.
sitting in the back, and we had the American RA was sitting in the front trying to guide the Indian driver, like, this is how you make sure you don't drift into the banks, like turn a little left this way. And we kept drifting off the side of the road into the snowbanks. Then they would get off and like pull the car over. And I was sitting in the back, and I'm like, okay, Meenah, you're gonna die today. Like, this
Die.
is the end of your life. And it is extremely scary. So go to sleep. I put myself to sleep. I literally just lay down in the back of the car and I put myself to sleep. And I'm like, if I'm sleeping, I will not know when I die. So even
Right.
if I'm in a snowbank somewhere, I will not know it. So, this is the best I can do. It was it was 3 a.m. in the morning in a snowstorm outside of
Oh my
Boston,
gosh.
right? So that is the most insane snow story that I have. But then I really didn't know what to expect. During spring break, I thought it would be spring. So I went to Canada and it was all gray and sleet and ice.
You went
But I
north.
went there thinking, this is spring break. I'm going to Canada on spring break. So yeah, I made a lot of not fun decisions when it comes to the weather. But it was an insane, I mean, Michael, I think those 2 years changed me. They
For sure.
made me a completely different person.
Yeah.
Um, Before that, I grew up in Pakistan. I grew up in Islamabad, which is the capital of Pakistan.
Right.
But Islamabad is a very small city and everybody knows each other. So I grew
Okay.
up in a city where, the tailor knew me and the shop owners all knew me and my parents, and everybody was connected and everybody kind of supported each other. And I was this outspoken, loud, fun person in Islamabad, and I get
Right.
thrown from that into this massive world where nobody knows me and they don't genuinely give beep about me.
Right.
So they just want me to get my stuff done and move on. And like I had to figure out every single thing from scratch, and I think that broke me down and it put me back together into a completely different person. And I'm so grateful that I got to have that experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think I had a similar experience, but traveling in a reverse direction. I mean, I was a pretty sheltered kid. And when I actually got on a plane and went to Japan for the first time for my study abroad, it wasn't to get a master's degree, but just to study abroad for a year. It changed my whole life. If
Yeah.
you think about it, I then went back to school. I graduated. I worked in New York for 2 years, and then got sent to Tokyo and lived there for 22 years. And I've never worked back in the United States again. I've been in Asia for 34 years. So yeah, I
Wow.
get it. And I'm a completely different person for sure.
Yeah.
And definitely different than I would have been if I just stayed in the United States my whole life. I think it's a watershed, I think, for sure. Yeah.
I think the humility that you learn when you're standing in line to pay for, something as inane as like bread and milk, but you
Yep.
can't figure out the coins. So you
Yeah.
have the currency in your hands and you're trying to count it, and the person at the desk is like not very happy with you, and they're kind
Right.
of trying to get you to move along, and there's people
Yeah.
behind you grumbling,
Behind you.
and you're just
Yeah.
standing there thinking like I was top dog where I was coming
Right.
from. Like everybody knew me, like I was doing so great, and then I won this thing and now I'm here. But here I'm just standing in line trying to figure out like what these coins mean, and it
Yeah.
really humbles you, and it makes you learn so much about your own self. And I think that's what happened for me for sure.
I could not agree with you more. Can you talk to me a little bit? I'm so curious about this invest to innovate. I've been wanting to talk to somebody about this for the longest time. I didn't
Yeah.
realize until I started doing research that you were involved in this. Can you talk a little bit about eye to eye for me? And maybe a
Yeah.
little bit about the startup ecosystem in Pakistan, if you don't mind?
For sure. So I was one of Pakistan's first accelerator programs.
Hmm.
Frankly, when Kulsoom Lakhani, who is the CEO, she's not now the CEO of I but like she is the founder. When she started it, I think even incubators started that same year. So there was really no ecosystem that existed back then
Yeah.
for startup, for like tech startups specifically, right? Pakistan has great tech talent, but it is all very much focused on software services. So we've been a services ecosystem, a services country for the longest time. And building product is only something that's, I think, come into play over the last 10 years or so. And before that, that simply didn't exist. So when Kulsoom started, the ecosystem didn't exist. She was one of the first ever people to start to build it up from scratch. And it was incredibly hard. So even when I joined in 2000, and I think I joined I in 2015, I met Kulsoom while I was still in the US because she lives partly, she's Pakistani American. She lives partly in DC. So I met her in the US, and then she hired me and I came back to Pakistan. I started working with them. There was barely anything. There were no VCs. We had no idea how investing even happened, right? There were no VCs. There were a few angels that were trying to call themselves angels, but actually they were very sharky in
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they did. everybody got together and killed a few good companies, or companies. We all got together and killed a few companies that could have had a lot of potential because nobody really knew what anybody was doing. It was a very steep learning curve, but Pakistan gets a lot of things right? Especially in terms of demographic. And I joke about this a lot,
Yeah.
Michael, because when I was growing up, they would ask us to write essays about how big an issue population is, right? Like write an essay about the problems that come with a massive population and how it's so important for us to curtail and like reduce our birth rate a little bit because there's just too many of us. And now when I go anywhere, I'm like, oh yeah, one of the biggest pluses for Pakistan is how big the market size is and how
Yeah.
it's a young population. So it's 60% under the age of 30, which is phenomenal. And now internet penetration is growing. So we check off all of those macros. Of course, there's a lot of things that are still that are still missing, right? So follow-on funding, even if early stage funding is available, follow-on funding is still very hard. Ease of doing business is still extremely low. There are so many rails that do not exist, but it is precisely because of all of this that this is such an asymmetric investment opportunity. Because
Yeah.
yes, there's risks that are high, but there's talent that can help you reduce those risks. So, as an ecosystem now, I think we have like 5 VC funds that are local, I would say, and they're all still first-time VC funds. So
Wow.
it's a lot of fun for everybody. There's a few angels that are actively investing, but there's a lot of talent. People are now getting focused on product more and more. There's a lot of just phenomenal founders because if you're a Pakistani founder, you have to be resilient. There's no other way, right? You
Yeah.
grew up during the war on terror. You saw all of those things firsthand. You lived through some insane stories. You saw political upheaval. Then you saw COVID. So there's so many things that we've already gone through that like resilience is
It's just part of the program.
it's the status quo for us. There is no other way. You have to survive.
Yeah, I want to make it clear to people that don't know enough about Pakistan. When you say a large population, it's almost 240 million people, maybe a little bit more now. That's as of
Yeah,
2022. It's a big country and also a
massive.
relatively, and you said before, focused on software and software services, at least in the past, which must mean it has a really good technical education too. No one wakes
Yes.
up and knows how to program, right? It's a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
hard work and a lot of hard education. And that's a good thing as well. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've been and that's because we were a services company. One of our biggest exports is actually tech services, right? So the tech
Yep.
sector exports a lot of these services. So there was a lot of focus from the government, also from universities, also. And again, because money did not really exist for startups, nobody was
Yep.
focusing on startups. When this kind of boom that happened in the last few years, 20 maybe up to all the way up to 2022, or at least 2021, when that happened and money started to flow in and international capital started to realize what a great market Pakistan was, we saw that shift happen from services to product, and we're still seeing more of that develop. So yeah, just a phenomenal market when it comes to market size. And again, tech penetration is growing, internet penetration is really fast growing, smartphone usage is growing really fast. So all of those things then just add up.
I love watching I love watching a country like Pakistan develop so quickly, right? Like you said, the internet penetration's there, the software knowledge is there. There are now local VCs there. People are starting to understand the funding. And with programs like Eye to Eye now, what did you say, like almost 10 years old, if not more?
Yeah, more
Yeah,
than 10 years old. Yeah.
more than 10 years old, yeah. So the impact there is going to be huge. I also want to talk to you about the Women Entrepreneurs Financing Initiative, because I think this is like indicative of like maybe the main mission of your life. You tell me if I'm wrong with that. And I love the shortened name for it, Wi-Fi. It almost sounds like Wi-Fi, so it sounds kind of techie in a way. I don't know if that's on purpose or not, but tell me more about this and why the World Bank and you thought this were important to do.
So Wi-Fi was created by World Bank as a global initiative. So it's taken place in
Mhm.
many different countries. They got me on board end of 2018 when I just left Eye to Eye. And I remember I was interviewing for like places like Uber. And my boss, who ended up being my boss at that time, who was at the World Bank, Sarma, just an amazing person. He said to me, "Listen, Meenah, the Ubers of the world are going to wait. I need you to come and design this first. Like you just need to do this. This is." And I ended up doing it for the next 4 years, and it was just absolutely phenomenal. So again, when it comes to women, I think globally, I mean, if you look at the overall percentage of money that goes to women entrepreneurs, I think it's what, 2%? Even in
Something
the
like that. Yeah.
UAE, it's extremely, extremely low. And for Pakistan as well, you see similar issues. You
Yep.
also see massive pipeline issues because of the way women have been brought up, right? Because of
Yeah.
what we were taught when we were kids, because of what we saw growing up, because
I'm
of
so
the
glad you
role
said that.
models that existed for us.
Yep.
I think, before I went to the US back when I was in undergrad, all I was thinking about was like, okay, getting married and having kids. Like that was the next milestone for me. There was really nothing else that I was looking forward to. So those pieces have been missing for women for so long that we see that reflected in the pipeline of women entrepreneurs as well, right?
Exactly.
And that's something that needs to be worked on. And it is not the job of VCs to go maybe that upstream and try to work on the development side of the pipeline, but it is definitely the job for donor organizations like the USAID, like the World Bank. And that is what they're doing in Pakistan. And of course, also the government. And that's also a lot of the government initiatives that take place to help develop and strengthen the pipeline for women entrepreneurs so that when they come downstream where VCs exist, there are investable companies to put money into.
Yeah, I'm so happy you brought this up. Right, this is something that I've kind of been intimating. As a man, it's hard for me to talk about,
Yeah.
but this idea of creating the pipeline has always been a difficult conversation to have, right? Because you want things to change in this generation, but to do that, you kind of have to change how this generation is brought up, how they're guided, how they're kind of pushed into one thing as opposed to another thing. And think about it, even for you, and you just said this, a woman who's well educated, ambitious. The thing you had in your mind before you got your degree was, how can I have kids and get married, right? And
Yeah,
if you
because
think
that's,
about how
yeah,
but if you think
that's the
about how your
direction
life
that
has
was being,
changed,
yeah.
yeah, that's the direction you were being told to kind of go down. That was the path you knew about, and even you kind of fought against that. Look where you are now, for God's sakes.
Yeah, I mean, it's so Michael, work has to happen simultaneously and in a lot of different places, right?
Yep.
So yes, there's a pipeline issue for sure, right? Like I say this as somebody who was a VC because I was a partner in a VC fund right before I moved to Metric, and
Yep.
I saw that pipeline issue. But even then, we did end up doing 40% of our total portfolio investments into women-led
Yep.
businesses, right?
Yep.
Because it was a KPI for us, for me
Right.
personally, for my partners. It was something that was in the forefront for us, not something that was in the background. When investors come and say, "Oh, we're gender agnostic," or "We don't see gender," that's BS. Because when you look at your portfolio, their
You can
portfolio,
tell.
you can see what gender
Yeah.
is there, right? So
Right.
nobody can claim that they couldn't even find a single woman founder that was investable. That's not true.
Right.
So there is enough of a pipeline for people to be investing into. They need to look into what their subconscious biases are, or what is it that they need to be doing more to attract more women founders towards their fund. Having said that, yes, for governments, for donor organizations, for ecosystem builders, there is still a need to make sure that we are nurturing the right kind of pipeline, and that there is enough diversity within that pipeline. So I think, I think it sometimes, and I don't want it to sound like, that's what I'm saying. I don't want this to be a cop out for anybody, right?
Nope. No.
Because it is not. There are women founders that you're not investing into. So even
Exactly.
for us, I remember having this conversation with one of my partners where we were looking at a woman founder, and after our meetings with her, I said to them in our IC, actually, I said to them, I think we're asking her different questions. And, I read a report about this recently also, which made me realize
Really?
investors ask women different questions and
Like
they
what?
ask men. So they ask men questions about growth, about visions, and about, where they're going to go. And they ask women questions about risks. What are the bigger issues that they think are going to fall? What if this happens? What if Google decides to make this? What if this sort of flips and then this happens?
Really?
What will you do when XYZ changes? So there's a big study that came out about this also, that investors tend to ask different questions when they're faced with women founders versus men. So I had that conversation with my own partners, and I said, I think we're asking her things that we have not expected from any of the men that we have invested in. We never asked them to jump through these hoops, but we want her to jump through these hoops. And none
Right.
of us are misogynistic in
Yeah.
general, but what
Yeah.
is it that we're doing that is making us behave this way? And we had to go back and reflect on it and change what we were asking her to do.
So why do you think that was the case? I love this kind of super self-awareness where you're sitting in a meeting thinking, well, wait a second. We are doing this differently, and
Yeah.
we're trying not to do it differently. What was the result of those internal conversations, and what was the understanding that you got about why? Do you know what I mean? The insight that you had.
So the why is simple. We've all been brought up that way. All of us, you, me, the men, the women, all of us, right? So just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I am less, maybe I have less of a chance of asking the wrong questions, maybe, because I grew up in the same way. So I have the
Right.
same fears. I mean, in Pakistan, because it's a nascent ecosystem and because I guess there's less accountability, women are still being asked things like, what if you decide to have a second child? Then what will happen to the company?
Yeah.
And men never get asked those questions. So that is
Never.
still very much the live reality of
Yeah.
Pakistan, right? So for us at Metric, we're super on the nose about it. I have a 4-year-old. I take her to most of my investor meetings. I call it
I
the
love
baby
it.
test.
I love it.
If an investor is uncomfortable with me having a child, then they should not be on my cap table. They should not
Yeah.
be on this journey with me. If they think that me having the probability of having another kid or not having another kid or whatever has anything to do with me being able to build this business, then they shouldn't be on this journey with me. But again, there's work needs to happen in so many different ways. When we ask women to work like they don't have kids, we also need to make sure that there are structures and infrastructure that's in place for them to be able to do it, right? So
Yeah.
many offices still don't have a crash or a childcare solution. How do we expect the women to come in leaving babies at home and not worrying about them, right? So it's just yeah, I think if we want things to change, everybody has to work together towards that one single goal, and saying that you don't see gender doesn't move the needle on it at all.
I was recording with two women at Money 2020 a few weeks ago in Bangkok. One of them was an entrepreneur, the other one was a senior executive at an insurance company, and they were both saying a similar thing. This idea that like having a baby only impacts half of the people that had the baby is kind of weird when you think about it, right? It's like there's another person involved,
Yeah.
and to be fair, it doesn't even matter who that other person is, right? Unless someone makes an active decision to be a single parent, that's a different
Yeah.
story. But even then, they still need a support system. It shouldn't change their accessibility to funding and to being an entrepreneur at any level. But
Yeah.
if there is a family unit, well, then the whole family is there to support
Yeah.
that baby, and they both should be able to run to the same situation. But I'll tell you this: when my daughter was born, I was back in the office on Monday and nobody ever said a word to me because that was just the way the system worked. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it was really deeply unfair. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. So at Metric, we have paternity leave. I still think that we need to increase it, but we have like about 1.5 months right now, which is super rare
that's
for
a lot.
Pakistan. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's super rare for Pakistan, and we have to convince people to take it. Like I had to sit
Right.
down with one of my team members and
Right.
say, "Listen, you're having a baby. You are going to go on leave." And he's like, "Are you sure about this?" Like it felt so alien to him, and
Yeah.
I had to have that conversation. I'm like, "Your wife needs you. Your baby needs you. You should be present for the baby so that those bonds develop. That there has to be the emotional connection. You need to be at home. Like you have to do this." So yeah, I think it is still something that is like even today, something that's so rare. But these are the conversations that we need to constantly have. And for us, for me, Michael, I mean, I wanted to have Mirana. Mirana is the name of my daughter. I
It's a
wanted to
beautiful
have
name.
Mirana, and I want to have my life. I want to
Yeah.
have Metric. I want to have Mirana. I want to have my life. I want to have my relationship. And I want all of it. I don't want to be put in a box and be just Mirana's mom for XYZ years while everything else, because that doesn't make me happy. For some people, that's fine, right? For
Yeah. Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
I need my life to be a cohesive unit, not pieces that I'm jumping into as required. So Mirana, like I'm saying, right, she goes to the investor meetings with us because she's a part of the journey. She is literally a part of the Metric journey for us. There's a baby room in our office from day one where Mirana goes and other people bring their kids. She has grown up in that office with those people, and that's okay for us. That works.
And can I say that to me, that looks like the beginning of the pipeline as well, right? Because if your daughter is growing up in a place of business with other children of other women who are also doing business, all she's going to know is everybody here who's doing business is also a lady. This is what I should do too. I can't wait to have my own baby in a baby room while I'm working, kind of thing, or building my own company. That's the beginning of the pipeline. Yeah.
That is that it gave me goosebumps when you put it that way, but that is exactly it, right? I make jokes about like, oh, Mirana, Forbes 5 under 5 hashtag no pressure, but she is literally, when I was pregnant with Mirana, I was working with a USAID delivering trainings. I trained about
Right.
500 to 700 women entrepreneurs while pregnant, right? I would travel. We were doing by road, so I would travel by road, get there, throw up, deliver the training, throw up again, get back in the car, and drive back to Islamabad, right? But she heard me talk about small business challenges while she was inside. She was just listening. She was just hearing me talk about pricing issues and costing
Right.
mistakes
I love
and
it.
social media marketing like 500 times, right? But for her to be able to see, and this is, it was missing for us. Those role models were missing for us. I think our mothers came from a different direction, and they thought, okay, this is my life, but I want something else for my daughter. I want my daughter to have a better life than me, and they pushed us in this direction. And now for us, we can be role models for these young ones and say, okay, you can have this, but everybody has to come together to make sure the infrastructure exists.
I want to share a story with you, and then I want to give you a little bit of perspective from me, and then I want to talk about Metric. My grandfather, who passed away 25 years ago or more, right, in the 80s, maybe 30 or 40 years ago now, sorry, was kicked out of school, bullied basically out of school when he was 7 years old. This is in like the 1920s, because he stuttered. So he couldn't read and he couldn't write and he couldn't do math. But he was super smart, and he built a pretty good business, and he married a woman who he was deeply in love with, who was an actuary. So she was a mathematician, and she was really smart. And the level of respect that he had for her, because without her, he couldn't have done like half the things he could do. He couldn't sign his own name on a check. Seriously. So the reliance he had on her was passed on to me about this level of respect. So in my mind, that was my role model.
Yeah.
For a woman. He drove her to work she didn't know how to drive. He drove her to work to Etna every day in Boston, from south of Boston, every day, and then would pick her up as well. But like, that was my role model for this working woman. And remember, she was doing that in the 60s and the 70s. And that's how I grew up, watching that, going, wow, I have a ton of respect for her, because she, like you, wanted to live this full life. Her brain was too active, right? And she fulfilled that by doing all these things, but it was the respect that he had for her that kind of got passed down to me.
Yeah. It normalizes it, right? For you, that relationship
completely.
just normalized. There was nothing weird or odd about it anymore.
Nope. Yeah. It was just what it was. Okay. How does somebody who worked at an accelerator or built it, helped build it, has, used to teach people, train people, was a venture capitalist as well? What excites you to then go out and say, I'm going to stop doing all of that stuff and build my own business?
I joke about it. I say we were just getting too much sleep. We had Mirana. She was about 1.5, 2-year-old. Like, we were just sleeping so much. We decided we had so much more time. We need to make our lives harder. Okay, so for me, and you can probably tell by the way I talk about it, entrepreneurship is something that I'm just extremely passionate about, right? My mom says, when she's trying to get me to like pray, she's like, Meenah, this entrepreneurship you talk about is not going to get you to heaven. You have to pray first to get there.
It might.
Because that's maybe how passionate I am about it.
Yeah.
I started business when I was 6 years old. I was telling you about it before also. I started just making and selling things, and I really, really, really appreciate my parents for putting that in place so that I was able to do it. I would literally just take my mother's like lemon and sugar and make lemonade and sell it back to my own parents. And then I grew that into like, then when my cousins would come over to stay for the summer, I would organize them into like a labor force and go around asking the neighborhood aunties if they wanted any chores done. And it was like a labor force for hire. I would charge money for like this child labor group that I would then rent out for like, we'll wash your car porch and we'll wash your car and we'll do this in your kitchen, or we'll do XYZ. And that's how it started for me.
But why? Like, what? And how old were you? Like, if you're 6 or 7 or even 10, Where does
Yeah.
this idea come from where you're thinking, I can get all my cousins, 6 or 7, however many there were, and we're going to be like cleaning up the local neighborhood, people's houses and driveways and stuff like that, and I can make money? Like, where does that come from?
So, a couple of different places. So, first of all, the way finances were structured in my house were that my father was working and my mother
Yep.
was a homemaker, and she got a
Okay.
limited budget to run the household in, right?
Yep.
So then when we as kids asked for something that was extra, and she then started giving us pocket money very early on, we had like a limited pocket money, and we would get it every month and we could spend it wherever we wanted to. And I loved reading, so I would spend a lot of it on books. And then if we needed more, we could ask her for an advance on our next month's pocket money, or we could figure out how to earn it, right? So
Yeah.
it was just as simple as that. So because we had limited cash, we had to figure out what we can do to get to the cash. And then also because I read a lot, I would read all of these novels where kids were doing these things. So I'm pretty
I
sure I
love
got
it.
the idea for selling lemonade from like one of the kids' novels that I used to read at that time, right?
Right.
And so together, it just in my mind, it became this thing where I was like, okay. And the first time I did it, I realized, oh, this works. I can create. I mean, now I know the words for it, but I can create value and get
Right.
paid for creating value for somebody else.
Kind
And
of
it
cool.
it was addictive, right? It changed my life because I think I started when I was 6, and I then grew it all the way into starting my own henna business when I was 14 old. And I ran that for 10 years, and I got to the
Wow.
point where brides would book me 6 months in advance of their weddings, and I was a really popular henna artist. Um, but I did everything, Michael. I was a photographer, and I wanted to buy a Nike, a Nikon, and I had to save money for it. So I borrowed some money from my mom, and I still have a notebook which has like, January payback
The
this much, February
payments.
payback this much from my pocket money back to my mom. And because I wanted to buy that camera, then I started doing other things. I did event management. I did dress designing. I did event photography once I had that camera. I literally tried out so many of the small businesses that I then ended up supporting in the next phase of my life. And I
Yeah.
made all of the mistakes, right? So I laugh about this also. I created Metric not because I love numbers, but actually because I hated accounting so much. And I
Yeah.
made so many of those number mistakes myself. And I saw firsthand how challenging it is to build anything from the ground up if you are somebody who's scared of numbers. So I
Yeah.
did
So
all of those businesses very early on.
I'm going to make actually two non-controversial statements, and feel free to argue with me. And again, I learned this from my architect, who I realized does not have a job. He just has a life. And his life is finding empty spaces and putting beautiful things in those
Sounds
spaces.
awesome.
Yeah. And I feel like that you don't have a job either. You just have a life, and that life is entrepreneurialism. And I don't think that that's an exaggeration. And I think the other kind of non-controversial statement is, now that I've spoken to you for, what is it, almost 35 minutes, I think I realize as well that Metric is really just an outgrowth and an extension of what you've been doing your whole life, and kind of all combined and coordinated into a platform that then goes out and helps all the people that you've been investing in, teaching, and accelerating in all the other different jobs that you had, including the Wi-Fi thing that you've built as well. It feels like a not a summation, because it's not over yet. It's really just starting. But it's like I'm taking all these little things that I've already been doing in different places and putting it on a platform, and then of course using artificial intelligence to do it. Maybe you want to tell me more about Metric, and if I'm wrong there.
No, I'm trying not to cry because like that is the most beautiful way anybody's ever put it. Like that's just I talk about it all the time to people. Like it feels like everything that we've been doing in the last in all of our lives has brought us to the point where we started
Yep.
Metric. And you also have to know my co-founder, right? My co-founder Omar, who also, by the way, is my husband, and we've been
Yep.
together for like 14 years at this point, married for about 8. I want to say I always have to do the
Who
counting.
remembers anymore? I'm with you.
Yeah, he's the numbers guy. He knows all the dates. Okay, it's not. It's I'm not the person that
Fair
that,
enough.
that has that responsibility. But Umar has been. So when I was at Eye to Eye, Umar was still being an accountant, and I convinced him to come and start to work with some of these entrepreneurs that I was working with for free, because I was like, listen, this comes naturally to you, and we're
Right.
really struggling. Like, I can't help them with this. So can you do this for free? So I started like involving him in the ecosystem pro bono for free. And he ended up doing this with hundreds of startups, right? He ended up building financial models. He ended up helping them structure their accounting systems, everything. So he's the one who actually one day at breakfast said to me, listen, Meenah, this work that you've been doing and I've been doing, I think there's a way to productize it and then get it to
Yeah.
millions instead of, in the course of our lifetimes, yes, we'll get to a few thousand, but it's not going to be enough. But if we can create a product out of it and make it so
Yeah.
simple that people can use it, then we can actually change the lives of millions. So for having him as a co-founder, he's a chartered accountant. He comes from that finance side, but he has also deeply worked with startups and SMEs. So together for us, this really did become a very natural extension of what we're doing. And our third co-founder, Dr. Habiba, is our CTO. She has been working on machine learning for the last 20 years, since before it was cool. Like she did her computer science in machine learning and data, 20 years ago from the University of Illinois. She was in the US for 10 years. She was in Germany for 4 years, working at the University of Constance and then Otto. Then she was at Microsoft in Australia. So she's worked on multiple countries, multiple different projects. And throughout, she's been into this. So when we brought her on board, her interest in this was, okay, this is going to be so interesting because the data that we get is going to be so rich. And the markets that we're working in are extremely opaque, dark markets, right? There is no data. So when somebody comes to me in a training and says, Meenah, I'm a photographer, I don't know what my profit margin should be. Can you tell me, what do you think my profit margin should be? And I'm like, unless I worked with millions of photographers, I cannot give you, even a range would be incorrect, right? Yeah. But with metric, we can already tell you, if you're a photographer, what the average range for photographers in XYZ region is. So if you're 2 below or 2 above, here are the things that you can do within your business to figure out what the best course of action is for you. So I've kind of jumped into this without talking about what metric is first, but that's the data piece that is super exciting. But do you want me to talk about what metric is?
Yeah, back up a little bit, because I want to understand how it works, and then I want to understand how the AI does this as well. But let's just get to the basic part of who's the target for it? I'm presuming it's SMEs, small and kind of medium-sized businesses. Here's the other thing too, and I think, and again, tell me where I'm wrong here, but I think there's a secular change taking place here in that large corporations have access to, they have resources that allows them to do all this data analysis, all this financial analysis, because they have their own data, right? They also have some industry data that is not opaque, it's not dark. And it means that, and there are companies out there that do research on these large companies.
Yes.
But they had to build like some of their own tech stack at some level. But for SMEs, they don't have the resources or the time to build it. And there's this abstraction that's taking place. And I think you're part of this secular change, whether it's in human resources. Stripe does this in the finance place for big companies. But it sounds to me like Metric is doing this, abstracting the finance role out of a small and medium-sized company and saying, use the platform to do this, and we'll help you do it at scale because we've already built all the tools that you need that you can't build yourselves.
Yeah. So there's 2 things, right? Tech is inherently deflationary. So number one, in an economic crisis, it really helps because tech is solving for a lot of those issues that otherwise you simply can't afford so many of these things. And number 2, yes, definitely tech is also something that democratizes, right?
Exactly.
So what we're trying to do is democratize access to those benchmarks as well as to your basic finance. Finance roles in SMEs in emerging markets actually do not exist because they can't afford it. They cannot afford to hire a data analyst that's looking at all their data. They actually usually cannot even afford a single platform where all of their data can come together. They cannot afford any kind of expertise that's able to then crunch that data and feed it back to them in any way or form that would be understandable for them, right? And business owners themselves cannot do it. In SME, in small and medium enterprises in emerging markets, business owners generally shy away from anything that has to do with numbers just because of the way accounting and finance has been built for centuries. You know how we were talking about how women have been brought up? In the same way, businesses have been brought up to almost fear accounting and finance. It has been gate kept to such an extreme level where it is so complex and it is so hard and it is so connected to regulations and government stuff and taxes that it becomes this big monster versus understanding that it is just a building block of my business and it is meant to help me grow my business, right? So instead of something that was helpful and supportive, it is scary. Like talking to your accountant usually gives you anxiety because A, they're speaking a different language, and B, you're really scared of what they're going to say next. I remember we had somebody on our team who was a tax expert, and he said, listen, the way I do it is I go in and I scare the client first. In the first meeting, I just scare them. I tell them everything that can go wrong with their business and everything that's about to blow up. And then I tell them how I will solve it for them, how I will make it easy, and how I will come in and save them. And we're like, nope, that is not how we do business. That is not what we're here to do. We will never scare. We're not,
Scare
that is
people.
the opposite, right? But this is I'm married to a chartered accountant. I've seen his journey in chartered accounting, and he is also my co-founder. So I understand how this has been built. And again, because accounting is linked to regulation, people believe that they only need to do it because you need to file your financial reports somewhere. You don't know how to read those financial reports, and you don't know how to use those financial reports. You are only filing them. So Metric, we started off by building, and we started calling it the world's most founder-friendly financial intelligence app. Before it was the world's most founder-friendly financial intelligence app. It was aspirational for us. But we call it that because that is what our vision for it is, right? We want Metric to become the simplest building block of business building in emerging markets. And I want to give you an example for how we think
Please.
about it, right?
Yep.
Most people don't realize or don't think about companies like Meta, Facebook, as social impact companies. But if you look at what they did for SMEs in emerging markets, they completely changed our reality, right? So, a decade plus ago, maybe, if I was a small business owner in a small city somewhere in Pakistan or even any other emerging market country, if I wanted to sell in a different country, in a bigger city, even not even just a different country, I would have to move all my inventory into that other city. I would have to figure out warehousing, transportation. I would have to figure out a graphic designer and a consultant for marketing and all of these complex things, which meant that it was really, really, really hard for me to do it, right? Now, if you're in a small city in any country and anywhere in the world and you have a business idea, one of the first things you do is create a Facebook page and an
Right.
Instagram account, and then you create a TikTok account. And you start taking pictures with your phone, your own phone, of your product, and you start putting them up. And over time, slowly, you build an audience and you start to generate sales. And you can sell to anywhere on earth
Yeah.
if you have a free shop on any of these platforms. Sure, I'm simplifying this, right? But
But it makes a point, though.
that it is that simple. Nobody is scared of marketing anymore because it is not complex. It has been democratized and simplified to that extent where an auntie sitting in Bhavalpur will be able to do it without having to ask anybody for help or having to spend anything on marketing, right? That is what we want to do for accounting and finance. We want it to be so simple that the day you think of a business idea, you make your Facebook account, your Instagram account, and your Metric account, and you connect everything together, and your accounting and your finance is being done, and you can see in real time how much you're spending, how much you're earning, and what are the next few steps that you need to take. Is your profit margin okay? Is your retention high enough? Are you doing any mistakes in your marketing strategy that are reflecting in your customer acquisition cost? And what is it that you can fix to make it be better? Like, that is the end vision for us.
And how do founders use it? What do they connect to it? Can I connect my bank account to it? Do I have to input things into it? Like, how does it actually work mechanically?
Yeah, so mechanically, you can input things into it, and there's a few different ways for input, and we're working on a lot more integration so that input can be even more simplified, which is where bank integrations also come in, right? So basic zero, like at zero, you start by putting things in. It's on your phone, you download it, you say, okay, this is, and it's very conversational. It's not scary. There's no Excel sheets anywhere. You say, this is how much I spent, and this is what I spent it on, and you're done. This is how much money I got. If you know the name of the customer, this is the person who I sold it to, this is the item, and you can add in as many items as you want. You can add in discounting. There's a ton of features in there, right? But it's all super non-scary, super simple. When you want to go one step above, you have the OCR. You can take pictures of your invoices, your receipts. You can save them within the app. You can document. It's digital vouchering, so you can save anything in a digital format. And you can have your input be done that way. Then when you get a little more complex, you can connect your QuickBooks to it. We've already built in a QuickBooks integration. So if you're a business that already has QuickBooks and you're using that to manage your business, you just layer Metric on top. So as the business founder who QuickBooks is not made for, so these tools that are in the market are made for accountants, not founders.
Right.
So as the founder, you can simply then layer metric to translate what QuickBooks is saying for you. Or in the future, Zoho, Zero, anything at all, translate what all of those things are saying. And you know in your dashboard, in your phone, what the health of your business is like. For the UAE, we already have 7 banks integrated because the UAE was our primary market in terms of monetization. So we have 7 UAE banks. So again, you can simply connect your bank account and your transaction data starts to flow in. We're also building integrations with Shopify. So if you're an e-commerce business, you connect your Shopify account, your data starts to flow in. Over time, the way we envision it is that metric will become that layer that connects to everything that you can possibly be using to build your business. So if you have a POS, you connect your POS. If you have an e-commerce platform, you connect that. And this becomes the layer that translates everything, aggregates all of that data, and translates it back to you in the simplest possible that you, as a business owner, are able to use in real time, day to day.
How long has Metric been out there? When was it founded? And when was the product not finalized, but when did it go out into the market?
The product went out and the app was launched. Our first, the Android app, we started just with Android. App was launched in July 2022.
Okay, that's almost 2 years ago.
That's almost 2 years ago. In our first 30 days, we realized that it was something out of a movie, right? We were 30 days in. I had to sit down to write my first investor update. And so I asked my data person to give me like the data on like what the usage has been like. And he's like, we've been used in 30 countries. I'm like, what? He's like, we've been used in 30 countries. I made him go back and check like 7 times because I couldn't believe it. Right. We were used in 30 countries in the first 30 days with no marketing. We had at that point not run anything at all. It was completely organic. In the next like 10 months, we had crossed 170 countries. To date, Metric has been used in 190 countries, and we have 130,000 businesses on the platform.
Oh my gosh.
And this is the 190 countries is organic. So what it made us, I think what it validated for us is how real this problem is, and that we were not dreaming it up when we thought that this was a real and critical issue, right?
For sure.
And not only was it a real issue for the country that we were in, but that it was an issue no matter where you were. And we had no
Everywhere.
Localizations. At that time, we did not have banks. We did not have QuickBooks. We did not have, we still don't have any language localizations. We don't have any tax localizations. We only have tax for the UAE now. Even then, people kept finding us and people kept using us because this problem was just so critical and business owners really do not have anything to fall back on.
And how do you get paid for this? Do they have to, is there a sign up thing? Is it a SaaS product that they use on a month to month basis? How does that work?
Yeah. So when we first started out, we had just the free plan. We did not have payment rails in place until like mid last year when we finally got them in place. And we had like 200 businesses attempt to pay us even before we had payment rails in place from all sorts of, imagine if you're a startup founder and that happens, like it was just the most,
where do we send the money? You're like,
oh my God. Yeah. And we're like, let us try to fix this because so we had Google Pay, we had Google integrated for payments. And because we were in Pakistan and we did not have, our bank account was a digital bank account in Singapore, Google kept blocking those payments. So we had to fly to Singapore to open up a physical bank account to solve that problem. But again, those are the kind of issues that you face as a startup founder. Yeah. That you don't think you're going to be facing on day zero of the business. But we have 4 plans. So there's the smallest plan, which is $9 a month, which is a light plan. It gives you a lot of basic flexibility. So by the way, we're a freemium model. So there's a free app, which is free forever, where we believe that a massive volume of businesses will always be. And we want it to be because we want this to change everybody's lives, not just those people that can pay for it. Then there's a $9 plan, there's a $29 plan, and there's a $79 plan. In the $79 plan, you get access to QuickBooks, you get a lot of those integrations, and of course then functionality shifts as you kind of go up or go down. But we have all of those plans in place. We've already hit $100,000 in ARR. And I always forget if I'm supposed to say this on podcasts or not, but now I've said it. We've hit $100,000 in ARR already. Again, with very little money that we've spent on monetization to date. We built all of this off of a small pre-seed round that we did almost 2 years ago now.
Wow.
And I think we've been able to stretch, and we're a very capital efficient company. We're very middle class in how we think, I guess, again, because from where we come from and our
Yeah.
own personal backgrounds and the country we come from. So that has been built in, like being able to stretch the dollar is something that's built into our DNA. And so, yeah, we've been able to build all of this off of, we raised under $1 million 2 years ago. And at that time, we had like the bare bones of the product. So we were able to get the whole tech team in, build the product, get designers, everything, and get to this point.
What's the long-term vision? By the way, congratulations. I love companies like yours that raise money but spend it like it's their own money. Do you know what I mean? Not like it's somebody
Yeah.
else's money. Not like a drunk,
I
not like
think,
a drunk sailor.
yeah, maybe also because we were investors before this, right? So
Yeah,
we like, what, when you're on the other side, you know how it feels. So when you're on this side again, you know exactly how to build. And again, because I guess I come from an SME background myself too. So as an SME in emerging markets, you don't have any external funding. So you build with your own money anyway. So it's part of our DNA.
I'm sure your mindset has changed quite a bit since you were a 6-year-old, for sure. But there's an embedded mentality around you about like how to do a business and how to run it efficiently and how to involve your cousins, which I loved actually. That probably never goes away, but just becomes more refined, more sophisticated, and more nuanced. And actually, that's the great thing about starting off with being an entrepreneur when you were 6. As you said earlier, the lessons you learn along the way, particularly when it comes to capital efficiency, right? I have no money. I want more money
Yeah.
from my mom, but she's not going to give it to me because she doesn't have it. How do I get it? Once I get it, I want to save it for that Nikon camera so then I can use that camera to make more money. And once you
Yes.
get into that kind of cycle, it kind of never goes away, if that
Yeah.
makes sense, no?
Yeah. But Michael, there's a flip side to this also. As a tech startup founder, you are also expected to show those insane top line numbers, which you're not
Maybe.
expected to show when you're building your business your way, right? A lot of times
Yep.
there's a lot of this pressure. So you exist in this place where you don't want your scarcity mindset, which is what I was brought up in, to
Right.
influence the decisions that you will take for your startup in a world where you have to have an abundance mindset. So I had to unlearn some things
Maybe.
too. It wasn't just being refined, it was also unlearning a lot of those things. I know right now the world has been thrust back, like globally, we've all been thrust back into the scarcity mindset again, right? But it is so critical to not lose sight of that abundance mindset, to know that when you're creating value, value will always be created for you. When you create value
Yes.
for the universe always sends value back to you. And you
Exactly.
have to do it with that abundance mindset. So you have to be careful. You have to spend it like it's your own money, but you also never have to make yourself smaller, fearing that there isn't going to be enough resources out there for you. If you're doing a good job, there will always be resources.
Okay, I'm going to end there. We've been at this for over 50 minutes. This has been an incredible conversation. You have to promise me that as you continue to grow and continue to learn, you'll come back. Maybe one of your co-founders, or both of them will come back. I want to keep telling the story of Metric. Meenah Tariq, a co-founder and the CEO of Metric, thank you so much for doing this today. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did.
I loved it so much, Michael. I think you have a gift for putting things together and pulling things out of people and putting them together in this beautiful, like I literally, at one point you were talking, I was looking around for like some tissue because I was like, I'm going to start tearing up because I cry really easily anyway. And all the things that you said were really just hitting me in my heart. I'm like, okay, he's going to make me cry. I need some tissue. I should have been better prepared. But it was so lovely for me. We are in a tough time, right? Globally we're in an economic recession. People are hurting. There is this tough financial climate that we're building in, and as startups, we're also, we're facing it too. 2023, I think, was really tough for everybody globally, and
Yep.
we also went through a lot of stuff, a lot of fires that were burning everywhere. But it is so critical, I think, conversations like this that help me reaffirm my own belief in my own journey and in the product that we're building, and remind me of why we're doing this. I think that's what this meant for me today. I would love for my co-founders to come and talk to you. Omar is amazing. He's had his own journey. Dr. Habiba is phenomenal. She's had this just her journey. She never talks about it. So it would be interesting to see how much you can get out of her. But she comes from a really different place in Pakistan, and her journey has been just absolutely insane. And I would love to, I'm going to send this to a lot of my other founder friends and say, you need to try and get Michael to talk to you because this was so much fun.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.